everyone. Please take a seat. Brilliant. We are under a very tight schedule today, so although one of our panelists hasn't quite joined us yet, they will be joining us very shortly, but we will start off nonetheless. So I'm Krian Butler. I'm the director of the Global Economy and Finance program in Chatham House, and it's an enormous pleasure to welcome you to today's panel, which is going to be on whether taxing polluting industries, I should say, is the way to fund the fight against climate change. And Chatham House is enormously pleased to be hosting this event in collaboration with the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force. Now, this is an enormously important topic, and we have a mountain to climb in terms of the amount of finance needed to help low-income and emerging economies achieve the net zero transition in all its different respects. And public international finance is a particularly powerful tool in that respect. And there's a lot of discussions been going on this week in terms of how you make the best use of the public international finance that's available. But the other thing you can do is look for new ways and new sources of public international finance, and that's what we're going to be focusing on in today's session. The idea of levies on undertaxed activities to fund important objectives has been around for some time, notably in terms of financial transaction taxes. But we're now in a situation where we have a new and very urgent purpose. So one of the questions we're looking at is how far the situation is now different. And to discuss this, we have a really excellent panel. Next to me is Ali Daoud Mohammed, who is the Special Envoy for Climate Change with the Executive Office of the President of Kenya, and he also serves as chair of the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change. Next to him, we have my good friend Avinash Persaud, and Avinash is currently the Special Advisor on Climate Change to the President of the Inter-American Development Bank. And next to him is also my other good friend and close colleague, Anna Aberg, who is the Research Associate at Chatham House, where she focuses on international climate policies and politics, and also UN climate negotiations. And we will be joined during the course of the discussion by Benoit Ferraco, who is France's ambassador in charge of climate change negotiations, decarbonized energy, and climate risk prevention. So some very quick housekeeping points. First of all, we are on the record. Although we're in Chatham House, we are on the record, and this event is being live streamed. We'll kick off with around 20-25 minutes of discussion among the panelists, and then we'll move to open questions from the audience. So please do have your questions ready, and when you do have questions, please try and keep them as short and to the point as possible, because you can see we've got a lot of people in the room, and we've also got a lot of people online, so I'm keen to try and get as many in as we can. And for various reasons, we're going to stop slightly early, so we're going to stop at 10 to 6. So as the clock gets close to 10 to 6, we'll be accelerating, so please keep that in mind. Now, let's start with a question maybe to you, if I may, Ali, about the work that you've been doing in the task force and where you've reached in terms of the conclusions, or likely conclusions, on the role of levies. Are there any particular levies that you think are going to be most attractive? What are the, if you like, the features of how you're going to apply them that you think are going to be really important in making them work in today's environment, which obviously is, very complex in all kinds of ways, as we know. So perhaps you could say a little bit about what you think is the most effective route that we should be able to take on this in this area.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon all. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I've a lot of times heard about Chatham House, and Chatham House rules and all of that, but it's really my first time to come to Chatham House, and very pleased and thank you for inviting us here. In 2023, President Macron, as you all will recall, hosted a very important meeting that eventually was called the Four Ps in Paris. That is the Paris Pact for People and Planet and Prosperity, where a number of heads of state, including my own head of state, President William Ruto, attended to discuss the whole issue of international financial reform agenda and how international financial reform is not working for today, and particularly for us in the developing part of the world. And out of that came out the whole task force and a number of activities. One of the activities that came up was the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force, which I am privileged to be co-chairing together with France and Barbados. We've been moving on since that time. Subsequent to the June meeting in Paris, we hosted the inaugural Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, which again, a number of African heads of state and government converged in Nairobi to discuss the whole issue of climate change and how climate change is impacting the economies and the lives and the livelihoods of the people of Africa and the world. And there also, we discussed the whole issue of finance, because really you can't talk about climate change and development separately. So climate change and development, and the challenges for the both of them is finance. And so how do we look and get additional finance at a time when we all know that public financing is shrinking, whether you talk of concessional financing or ODA and all that. And so the heads of state and government of Africa adopted a declaration that we refer to as the Nairobi Declaration. And therein they emphasized the whole issue of let's look at innovative ways of raising finance. And we approached the issue of levies, global levies, and subsequently in Dubai at the COP28, we launched the countries of Kenya, France, and many others, Barbados included, and I think Colombia and others, launched the task force. So that was the beginning of the task force to discuss, to look at innovative ways of raising finance. And so we've been having sessions and meetings the last 2 years. I must say, we've done significant progress with the task force, which is the secretariat is provided by the European Climate Foundation. We've been able to put together a number of proposals coming from experts, and one of the experts here sitting next to me here, and that we've shared with the world at different forums. We did it during the spring meetings this year in Washington. We did it also last year during the Baku meetings, and we are lucky now. We have also been given a special slot in the upcoming FFD4 in Sevilla. Then it will be part of the platforms that FFD4 will be presenting. So that is the genesis and the direction that we've taken. And we're looking forward to the next meeting, the COP30, when we all hope to now launch properly the suggestions that we think a number of coalition countries or countries, what do I call them? Coalition of the willing, I think that's what I was looking for. Yeah. Coalition of the willing countries will come together and launch. So it's not supposed to be an internationally agreed process, but it is going to be something that is going to be pushed by the countries that believe in this process. And I must say that over the last 2 years, we've grown significantly. We started with the 3 or so countries that I mentioned earlier, but now we are up to 73 or so countries are members of the task force. It's growing.
And do you, I get the sense that you may have a number of different coalitions with a number of different levies. So you may have if you like, a financial transactions tax, levies, or, but do you have a sense at this stage, or maybe it's too early, which is likely to be the most popular type of levy?
So in terms of the types of levies that both Paris meeting and the Nairobi meeting and the subsequent discussions by the experts have looked at are several. So this aviation levy, there's the shipping levy, the fossil fuel levy, recently also the plastic levy and so on, the FTT, financial transaction tax levy, and even the crypto tax, cryptocurrency taxation and so on. So have been looked at. But the one that is almost mature, if I can call it so, is the aviation taxation. Why? Because it's not new. It's been tested before. I think from what we've been able to learn and know is that the French government had started this from 2006, and unit aid they had been using, and I understand in excess of $2 billion have been raised over the years to support largely health focus. And so it is possible. And the target group for levying on this is not every person. Mm-hmm. One, of course, aviation is a big polluter. So from the statistics, we see that aviation emissions are up to 2.5% of global emissions. And among the people really who contribute to that, the people who fly around a lot, it's 1% of the world. From the statistics we've seen, 1% of the world contributes to 50% of the total aviation emissions. Mm-hmm. And 2% of the frequent flyers comprise the total use of 40% of also travels. Yep. So we're looking at possibilities of taxing, the business classes and the first class and so on. Not every person really who travels, so that it is only the people we think can afford and where there will not be much repercussions from the populace.
So in a way this works politically, partly because it's focused on an industry that is producing a lot of greenhouse gas, and secondly because of the distributional impact. Avinash, maybe I could come on to you next and sort of dig a little bit further into how one makes this work politically. I mean, you've cited a number of examples of levies in the past, some of which are similar to this, some of which are not. Are there any particular ones you would highlight, I mean, other than the financial transactions tax, which you think is particularly relevant to this challenge, and which, if you like, illustrates how you get over the political hurdles that exist in this space?
It's an important question, Crayon, because when we clearly need more public finance. I spend a lot of my time trying to develop the other bits of finance, because there's a limit to how much public finance there is, and that limited amount, if anything, it's shrinking. It's not increasing. Mm-hmm. It's not filling the gap. ODA budgets, overseas development assistance, is reckoned to be down 7% this year and maybe 20% next year. Mm-hmm. We need to find ways of pumping that up and not letting it deflate. It's already too small. So, and what you often get when you say those things and say we should do this, people say, oh, you can't do that. That won't work. People will avoid it. People will evade it. It's impossible. It's impossible to do anything. And so we have to come up with the fact that these things exist and they've been around for a while. I mean, you said don't mention the financial transaction tax, but that's an example of a tax that's been around since 1694. And today there's some 30-odd countries raising over $20 billion every year. But when you hear the finance industry, they'll often say, well, it can't be done. This thing that can't be done is raising a lot of money every year. And indeed, very recently, as in the last 10 years, France and Italy put on a new financial transaction tax. And if you add up all the money that they've raised since then, just about 12 years ago, it's almost $20 billion. That's $20 billion that we wouldn't have had if we'd listened to people saying can't be done. I think the aviation tax is one that is there. Now, aviation is quite heavily taxed in many ways, so we need to find ways of filling those gaps. So the private jets, I think, is an area that I understand the task force is quite focused on, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the IMO, in this era in which there is a lot of challenge to multilateralism, the International Maritime Organization in April of this year agreed a multilateral system of levies. Mm-hmm. Not the thing that everyone wanted, but it was an interesting system of levies based around emissions. Yep. And that could raise $5 to $10 billion a year. So I think It was Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the French finance minister, who said the art of taxation is in plucking the feathers from the goose to pluck as many feathers as possible with the least amount of hissing. So you need to find the biggest systems in the world economy. Trade is a big system. Shipping is a big system. Aviation is a big system. So we need to find taxes around. Finance is a big system. So we need to find small taxes on these big systems and tax them.
You raised the point about multilateralism and the pushback against multilateralism. And in a way, I fully get that this is designed for coalitions of the willing. And for example, if the United States doesn't want to take part, that doesn't mean that's okay. I mean, ideally they would, but if they choose not to, that's okay. And other countries, other groups of countries can go ahead. However, we've seen since the new President Trump's second term, a new kind of approach where in the US they will say not only are we going to do things domestically, but we may see other countries doing something which we regard as being discriminatory against our companies. And we're going to take action on that, whether it's in tariffs or in other respects. So we're in a new kind of the world where, in a sense, the coalition of the willing may not be enough. I don't know if you have any sense of how big the risk is with some of these proposals that could be the case. And in a sense, if you have what should the response be if you're faced with a situation where, for example, there's one of these levies disproportionately impacts US companies, let's say, and the president says this is not acceptable.
I can't talk about the specific case of the United States today. Countries will decide what they want to do with their own tax policies. But I think that that one of the important points is that you need to think about the domestic politics. And one of the challenges we're having at the moment is that the electorates are feeling that climate transitions and climate change are involving levies and taxes on them. And in part, they are correct that we established some very expensive energy transitions through heavy subsidies a long time ago to get the industry and the markets moving first, which they did. Remember that time when Germany, one of the places with the least amount of sun, was producing the most solar power. That's where even taxes can beat the sun. But we've now got the legacy of those contracts. So we've got to find a way of making sure that the true benefit of solar and wind, which is now the cheapest form of energy, the electorates are not seeing that. So we need to make sure that they can do that. But let me end by saying that I think in all of these revenue systems, we need to make sure that the countries levying it, they get a share of it. The politics will not work if a country is levying a tax on its people and all of those resources are going somewhere else. If some large proportion, significant proportion, is kept internally for things to do with building resilience or whatever, and then others sent internationally, that may work.
Right. Avinash, thank you very much, and Ambassador Farako, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm going to come next to my colleague on another really important issue which has been flagged, which is if you like, the roadmap for taking this forward beyond today into COP30 and beyond. We've heard a lot about the way the proposals are emerging, some of the absolutely crucial elements about what kind of can make them work politically. But Anna, what do you think? I mean, what is the best way of taking this into COP30 and beyond? Perhaps put it that way.
Thanks, Creon. And I'll build a bit on what others have said before me. And as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, the context is really not easy. It has never been when it comes to mobilizing climate finance at scale, but it has definitely become a lot more difficult in the last few months. The US is withdrawing from the Paris Agreement for a second time. It has dismantled the USAID. We're seeing European governments cut their aid budgets, and the entire UN system is under immense pressure. And I don't think anybody is expecting an absolutely massive breakthrough on solidarity levies ahead of COP30, where all of a sudden we get hundreds of billions of dollars raised in additional climate finance as a result of these levies in the next few months. But that is not to say that nothing can be done to progress this agenda in the short term. Because you can start small, and then you expand and you build out, and perceptions and norms shift over time. Take the issue of loss and damage, for example. For many, many years, for decades, everybody thought it was impossible, essentially, that we would have a loss and damage fund. But now we have one. And positions and perceptions shifted a lot in just 1 year. Actually, it was quite remarkable to see that play out. And I think similar things can be said for discussions around net zero or putting an end date to oil and gas production. In the beginning, it seems like some kind of fantasy, but then it becomes a normalized part of the discussion. You dig into the details, and all of a sudden you see these shifts taking place. And as Avinash said, these solidarity levels, they've been around. It's not a new thing. It's something that can be done. 30 countries have some form of financial transactions tax. Over 20 implement a form of airplane levy. We've spoken about the unit aid arrangement. So these are models we can build on and we can replicate.
And if I may ask, I mean, in a way you've set out that there is a trade-off. You know, you could either do this primarily at the outset for demonstration effect, or you could do it with revenue raising as your priority, which might mean you have fewer cases, if you like, but you do raise more revenue at the start. And we know climate action is super urgent, and we need the money. Do you just, having looked at this for some time, do you instinctively have a feel? Should the priority be the demonstration effect with a view that, you know, we may get a pickup much later on, or do you think the revenue raising, or is it a bit of both, as often is the case?
I think two main things need to happen in the short term. I think one is this issue of shifting perceptions. Avinash spoke about that. We need governments to go from thinking this is impossible, it can't be done, to thinking this is actually possible, and it makes a lot of sense. And secondly, we need a group of governments to come forward and say, we're actually going to do this. And of course, it would be great if lots of governments did this, but I think it's okay to start small, because you have a few people coming out saying we're going to do this. It enables the conversation to be normalized. It raises the profile of the issue. You build momentum over time. More governments can join as the years go by, and all of a sudden you might be able to raise quite a lot of money through these levies. And maybe to return to your initial question about the road to COP, I think there are a few important opportunities in the next few months to really accelerate this agenda. One is happening next week, the Financing for Development Conference. This provides a really good opportunity for governments to come forward and say, we're interested in doing this. We want to explore the air ticket levy, for example. And then there's, of course, COP30. As I'm sure many of you in this room will be aware, the Brazilian presidency, along with the COP29 presidency, are developing a roadmap for how to mobilize 1.3 trillion in climate finance by 2035. This is not a negotiated document. We haven't seen a first draft yet. It's not going to apportion responsibility and provide legally binding obligations. But if we can get solidarities levies in there, that can help raise the profile of these levies in international climate discussions. And obviously, Kenya, Barbados, and France have a pivotal role in driving this forward. But I also see an important role for Brazil here. They're coordinating this coalition of finance ministers. Is it possible to put solidarity levies on the agenda for that group, which might help build support for this and socialize the issue?
Great. So, I mean, I used to be a summit geek, so I get the text in the most positive way you can, at least at the outset. Thank you, Anna. Benoit Fouracco, maybe I can come to you. We've had, as you can probably guess, the discussion we've had so far. We've looked at it from a number of different perspectives. But it would be great to get France's perspective on this, and particularly from an advanced country. Maybe one of the points in particular is that France, there are enormous challenges in terms of public spending, as in the UK. If you have a new tax, you can think of all kinds of things you can do with it locally. But there is an aim here to use the tax not for local aims, but for broader aims. And one thing actually in an earlier discussion Avinash was saying is that, one thing you could do is actually split the revenue. So some of it you use locally, but some of it you use internationally. But it'd be great to get your view on how you think this will work in France, and also whether, in terms of dealing with that specific issue of finance constraints and so on, how you'd address it.
No, I will stay. Thank you, and sorry for being so late, but Rachel Kite in a previous meeting told me that I can use as an excuse that it's London Climate Week and it's a magic word to come late to meetings, so I was in London Climate Week, sorry for that. No, I'm so happy to joining this very interesting conversation with colleagues, and in particular with our friends from Kenya, because one of the first element, we in France, we have a long history of thinking about global solidarity levy. President Chirac, like more than 30 years ago, when I was still a kid, set up this tax on air tickets to fund global health. It was successful in France. It helps a lot to contribute, in particular, in the big battle against AIDS, supporting our developing country partners. So we did a lot, but one of the lessons we learned from that is, of course, you can start with a small group, but at the end of the day, you need to find a solution to enlarge your basis. It's not sustainable in this complicated world to be a front runner forever and ever and ever. So that's why we launched with Kenya and Barbados this initiative on global solidarity levy. Because I think we are still a few countries, but very convinced that this is a unique tool we will need at a certain point of this conversation. It will take a very, very long time, and as the actual climate at the international geopolitics does not really help, but we are still here and we want to continue to engage in this conversation. It will take time, but it will be necessary, and it's so obvious. You probably recall the figures, but when you look at what is at stake on climate change, we will need billions of investment, including public money. It will not be only public money, but we will need public money to support decarbonization, both at home but also internationally. That's crystal clear, and that's part of the deal of the Paris Agreement. We are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement this year, and it was globally in the contract of the Paris Agreement. It was collective action and collective support to developing countries, and we are committed to continue on this part of the deal, and we see global solidarity levies as a very powerful tool to do so. We have also new needs for finance, and I'm very concerned about adaptation at this stage because in the next decade, for a lot of people in a lot of countries, is going to be very complicated and very costly. And no one in any part of the world has a budget dedicated to adaptation consistent with the need. We have strong initiative on adaptation, but there is a need and there is no source of revenue. So that's why this agenda is so obvious. And my last point on this, to give a little bit of hope also in this process, because yes, we will not deliver on global solidarity levy in the next 3 months. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, when you look also at the conversation we have on fair transition, climate justice is in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, and there is a huge interest for a lot of partners, both for domestic discussion but also international discussion on fair transition. And this global solidarity levy also is a response to fair transition at home, once again, but also internationally. And that's why it's still time to continue to discuss this, because at the end of the day, we maybe are a few countries wanting to move forward, but I'm sure that at the end of the day, it will probably take a lot of years. We will be more and more, because it's so obvious we need those.
That's really helpful. Sorry, Anna.
No, I was just agreeing. But
Okay. One of the key elements of this is the idea that it's a kind of network of countries, and you implement it through national procedures and processes, but in a kind of coordinated way. But then the question is, once you've raised the funds, there's then a key question of how you're going to spend it, and how you're going to coordinate, if you like, the spending of the funds that you raise through this approach. Now, you could use some of the existing climate funds, and you could say, we're going to funnel into that route. Do you think that is, I mean, institutionally, that may be the most efficient? Do you think that is probably the way to go, or do you think there may be a need in some way to?
It's quite complicated because from my previous experience, I was, trying to work as an advisor to President Macron to implement the Paris Agreement. So I was facing economic sector requiring investment. It's a case of aviation. In Europe, we have one of the most ambitious normative framework for aviation, which basically set up big standards for incorporation of post-fossil fuel energy. It's challenging, it's costly, and we need to basically support them in their investment strategy. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet our target. But the question for me is that why it's not, we can see global solidarity levy as a top-up in the system of, or in the global architecture for financing climate, but we need to keep in mind that we need to have the broader perspective. That's why this conversation about the package we had in Baku, 300 billion, the roadmap to 1.3 trillion and innovative finance come together. You cannot separate the discussion. Of course, we know that under the Paris Agreement, under the new UNFCCC, we have commitments to provide support to developing economy. But it's not, we need to have all this conversation together because you cannot choose between decarbonizing aviation, maritime transport, the energy sector, and supporting those communities who are the more vulnerable. It's not a choice as a policymaker you want to make on a
But you have to,
basis.
because to some extent you're going to have to, because there's not enough funds.
That's why you need to think about private finance, public finance, existing reorientation of existing flows, and additional flow all together. Otherwise, we will have to choose, and at the end of the day, we will not meet our objectives.
Right, understood. Avinash, I'll come to you very quickly, and then I want to get some questions.
So I was a negotiator for Latin America and the Caribbean for the Loss and Damage Fund. And one of the trade-offs we have to think about is that the existing institutions, they're very clunky, they're slow, they've got issues about access, issues about conditionality. But we still, weighing that up, decided that was better than taking the time to create a brand new institution, brand new governance, and all of the uncertainty that would be. So I think the existing institutions are good places to start, but we need to make them better. We need to make them more responsive, and we need to be concerned about their conditionality and their access. The one other point I'd make is that if you add up all of the grants available in the world and the overseas development assistance for climate, and you add some more, that will still not be enough for loss and damage. And so I believe that money should be, grant money should be focused on loss and damage, because loss and damage cannot be funded any other way. While it's adaptation, we now know that $1 spent on adaptation will bring you $10 to $14 of fiscal savings. So we should do long-term, low-cost lending for adaptation and put the grants for loss and damage. Taking grants and spending on other things means less money for loss and damage that can't be funded.
And we have a fund already. So I do want to get some questions because we have, I think, only 15 minutes, but we'll pick up the points as we go around. So let's gather some questions and we will hoover them up. So this lady here, first of all, and a mic will come to you, and then we'll get as many as we can. We'll take 2 or 3, yes.
Thanks.
If you could say who you are and then put your question up.
Yeah, so my name's Aoife Lear. I'm from Opportunity Green, and I actually worked on decarbonising shipping and aviation for 10 years. And my question is, in the contrast, shipping and the net zero framework was within that multilateral framework, so it was at the International Maritime Organization, whereas what you're talking about on aviation is outside of that. And for sure they are a goose that is hissing. They are not impressed by this, and so for that I commend you. But my question is, are you also then, is there any plans to bring that within the multilateral framework and go to the International Civil Aviation Organization with this and kind of say, look, this is also a place where people could join, and there's an assembly this September, and I think you might find at least some friends there, so would love to hear.
So the idea is, should you use the ICAO as a focus for
getting more people on board?
Okay, got it. Let's take some more from this bank. I think, there was 2 ranks back, there was a gentleman there. Sorry. Thanks very much. This gentleman and then this one. We'll get 2, 3 together, and then we'll come to the other banks.
Hi, Ashfaq Alfan from Oxfam. I wanted to, in terms of the geese, some geese carry viruses. So I'd like to ask Ambassador Mohammed and Ambassador Franco in particular, where are you on taxing fossil fuel industry and particularly fossil fuel industry profits? We did a survey of global opinion, and well done on aviation. 75% of the people surveyed support exactly what you're proposing. 8 out of 10, 80% support taxing oil and gas industry for and using that for climate. So good to know where your thinking is going on that aspect
Super.
as well.
Thank you very much. And there's a gentleman behind. Let's get that question as well, and then we'll move to one of the other banks.
Hi there, Dominic Eagleton from the NGO Global Witness. My question was about the UK government, which obviously is positioning itself as a climate leader. But I wondered, if any of the panelists that are part of the task force, whether they know if the UK is going to be supportive, or is the UK getting involved in any way? Is the UK looking into this?
Shouldn't we be asking the UK government that in a way?
Well, I'm saying this because for sure, but I just wonder if
perhaps, I don't know.
if there's been any
Okay,
input.
let's get one more from this bank, and then we'll get some responses. So, gentleman here on the end, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the panel discussion. I'm Manikam Valiappan. I'm a research consultant for an environmental consultancy called Shared Planet. My question is surrounding the feasibility of potentially taxing the agricultural sector. I'm just wondering if there's any policy space for taxing agriculture for solidarity levy. And I also have a second question, a very quick one, which is surrounding kerosene tax within aviation. Of course, this would require a rewiring of institutional frameworks, international institutional frameworks. So I'm just wondering if this is something that we can achieve in the short to medium run. Thank you so much.
Super. So maybe we could come to you first, and you've got questions about different areas of taxation: agriculture, fossil fuels, doing more in aviation. How would you like to respond to those points?
Well, first of all, let me respond to the gentleman who was asking about the UK. We're reaching out to as many governments as we can, and we've reached out to the UK government, and the UK government has been participating in some of our meetings as an observer. We hope that they will join us fully. On the ICAO, just like IMO, I think there is opportunity really but ICAO is really very difficult politically. I know it's not going to fly, but it's something that we could try, but we haven't, we don't think it is the best approach given the toxicity of the discussions, if I can call it so, in ICAO. But that will be one of the avenues to go through. My friend from Oxfam, I greet you. I know you're pushing the whole issue of fossil fuel, and it is one of the particular areas of great interest. From, I think, studies which Oxfam is also included, the fossil fuel subsidies annually, 2022 was $7 trillion. And much of it has been going back to the same sector. And so there is great opportunity to tax. We know recently the EU came up with some taxation that they're calling surplus tax for fossil fuel. We haven't, I think it's still a very politically sensitive area. We think it's possible, but it's not an area that we think will give us results immediately. And the colleague from on the issues of agriculture, I think I'll leave it to the other panelists to answer that. But on kerosene, it's one of the very easy, low-hanging fruits that can be accessed. Kerosene for private jets, I think the estimate that we have is could give us up to in excess of $40 billion annually just from private jets. If that was expanded to all other jets or aviation, it could be 106. I think that's the figure that I saw. And so it is a possibility, and that is one area that can easily be extended.
That's great. Would anybody like to pick up the question on agriculture?
Well,
Avinash, and then we'll get
methane is a super pollutant.
Yeah.
So we need to reduce methane emissions. Agriculture is a major source of methane emissions, not the only source. Perhaps we could take this first by dealing with leaks on pipes, gas pipes, etc., and landfills. That's probably the first way to go on methane, because the politics of dealing with the agricultural sector is difficult. There's a lot of, I'm an economist, we love taxation, taxes, but there's actually a lot of progress being made on resilience in agriculture and changing the nature of the agriculture we do that reduces emissions, and we need to progress with that as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's also distributional issues that every country in the world is doing agriculture, including some of the poorest. So, yeah,
Definitely.
I imagine this is. Let's get another bunch of questions, and then we'll come back to the other panelists. So from this bank here, I can see two in the middle, and then we'll go over that side. Thank you. So those two gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Abubakar Sise, and I am from Sierra Leone. So regarding the climate finance and how we can spend the money, I know you suggested loss and damage. And for me, coming from Sierra Leone, I think it's very important to me. It's both a climate justice thing. So when we talk about loss and damage and taxing polluting industries, I am wondering if we can also look at taxing them for historical emissions instead of just current emissions. I think that will also increase finance for loss and damage, because I wrote an essay during my MSc studies that proposed the implementation of polluter pay principle at a global level. And I think if we can tax fossil fuel companies for historical emissions, we can also do the same for other sectors. And that is really crucial.
That's a great question. Thank you very much. And the gentleman next to you.
Hello, Imad Ahmed, Tony Blair Institute. The ambassadors and Avinash have done a fantastic job corralling 73 countries into the coalition of the willing. But with the backdrop of contracting ODA budgets among the DAC countries, and with concerns of the distributional effects of the levies fanned by right-wing media in developed democracies, how optimistic do you feel about winning the argument at COP30 and including solidarity taxes within the Baku to Belém roadmap?
Great. And then we'll take one more at the front here, if we could. This gentleman here.
My name's Hussein. I study European politics. And my question is, how will the failure of Canada's carbon tax on a provincial and federal level set back the panel's mission objectives? And what are the solutions to right-wing backlash to the carbon tax and its abolition by Mark Carney?
Right. Let's start at the end, Benoit, if I may ask you to take some of those. So we've got a question about the historic emissions and so on, but you take the ones you wish.
Interesting and difficult question, and I think collectively, because I was on the political side over the last 10 years, and my advice is don't listen economists. No, because at the end of the day, what is interesting, and I've seen that in Europe, Europe is pioneer on carbon pricing, and it's quite similar to Canada. We are trying to implement instruments which are not global solidarity levy, but in a way are taxing those who are consuming fossil fuel. And I think one of interesting questions, and that's why I strongly agree with what Ali said on private jet, for instance. It's also very important to be very concrete on the one who are going to pay at the end of the day. I mean, let's not be naive. We have to look at what will be the impact of any kind of global solidarity levy on the people, because in some time, and we've experienced this in France a couple years ago with the Gilets jaunes, which was quite similar to the backlash happening in Canada on carbon tax. Sometimes those who are put under some fiscal pressure are those who are also the most vulnerable, because your instrument is not well calibrated. I mean, it's not questioning the instrument, it's questioning the implementation. And it's a challenge for all of us. I mean, in many countries, we have very, level of inequalities that are growing. And it's challenging because you have not a one-size-fits-all mechanism. And I think it must not be taboo to discuss about, at the end of the day, who is paying. For instance, on your question on fossil fuel, I can return the question, is it on production or consumption? Because if it's on production, it's better to engage the conversation with oil or gas producing country, which France is not, because we decided to go net zero and to move away and to not allow any fossil fuel project in France. So at the end of the day, there is no revenue that we can raise from fossil fuel production in France. But if it's consumption, it's another story. But at the end of the day, it will be the French taxpayers that will contribute. So I think we need to be very specific on, and it's the same for agriculture. Totally agree on what has been said on methane. But once again, this is a sector which is very complex. So we need to be very specific and to assume what we are doing on who is the contributing party in this process. It's very important to be transparent, because at the end of the day, if not, you can see this kind of backlash, and your willingness to find more money, because of course we need more money, can be challenged by those who don't want to contribute.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Anna or
Yeah,
Avinash,
and I agree. I think it's important to be specific, because not all levies are equal. And if you don't go into the specifics about who the cost is going to fall on, what rates are we talking about, how will the revenue be allocated, and so forth, there's a risk that the conversation goes nowhere. But there is a way of doing this in a way that minimizes costs for low-income households. We spoke about the frequent flyer levy earlier, for example. So that's one thing. Another issue is what you raised in your question, which we perhaps should talk a bit more about, is where the revenue is going to go to. I think it would be helpful for this agenda in general if the task force were able to progress those conversations, and maybe, I suspect work is going on around this, to come up with some principles or some kind of common vision about how to allocate the money, because that will help build goodwill among developing countries, and I guess that is what one would want as a rich country government. And also to agree with you, we have the loss and damage fund. It's now up and running. Lots of progress has been made. It has raised some money, I think around 770 million or so, but the needs are already in the hundreds of, well, around 100 billion, and it's going to rise dramatically in the next few years. So much political capital has been spent on this. This is only a problem that is going to get worse. Developing countries need grants to address this, for the reason Avinash pointed out. So I think there's a need to have that conversation as well. Where will the revenues go to?
Great. Avinash,
I'll be very quick. I know the backlash is based on two things. One, today solar and wind are the cheapest forms of energy, but it wasn't so 10, 15 years ago. We need to find a way of breaking these old contracts, and that will help to lower costs. Secondly, a lot of these subsidies politicians believe they're supporting the more vulnerable people in our society. So we can't remove subsidies, but we can repurpose subsidies. And we're seeing that in the UK with the fuel that tax, the winter fuel tax. We need to find ways to make sure the beneficiaries are benefiting, but not through energy subsidizing fossil fuels.
Yeah, great. Now, I want to try and get 2 more questions at least in, and then everybody's going to have to be super quick, because I know you have to disappear very quickly. So we should get one from this side, a gentleman at the back there, and then I would like to get one from over there as well. So
thank you. Max Kronig from E3G, and I wanted to ask maybe a spoiling question, but taxing these negative activities means you raise money maybe up front, but only as long as people keep flying or keep using these activities that you tax. So your tax base ideally disappears, but the climate impacts will grow over time. So this is like it's a challenge in a system. And also, of course, in a way, is it maybe like an offsetting idea, or like it's making it okay to fly first class, basically, if you pay the levy. Is it sending the wrong message in a sense?
Yeah, so it's a nice problem to have, though, to some extent. And then we got a lady right on the other side, and then we'll have to come back to the conclusion.
Hi, thanks so much for the panel, Alex from from ECHO. Sorry, I used to work with E3G. It's really interesting to hear some of you bring up the geopolitical situation, especially Anna, that we're facing. And I wonder, from your perspectives, do you see more opportunity to drive these solidarity levies kind of under the radar? I think it's relatively under the radar at the moment. You're getting some demonstrations that are building a bit more confidence amongst countries. Or is this something that could be elevated to a more geopolitical level as an affront to some countries that are maybe bullying others around the world at the moment? Is there something to be gained from elevating this to a more geopolitical competitive level?
Thank you very much. So I'm going to come along this way, starting Ali first. I give you the opportunity to respond to these 2 points, or if there's another point you want to make that you don't feel has been made, and I'm afraid you've got about 30 seconds each, because I know that.
Well, thank you very much. Just to say that, first of all, the Solidarity Levies initiative is a very noble initiative, and we're very glad that it has been able to attract a number of other governments beyond the ones who have started. It is a climate justice issue, and I think it resonates well with most people. I don't want to answer the questions that were put directly, but to the extent that climate requires substantial resources to address the challenges, both for developing countries and developed countries indeed, there is a need to look at innovative ways of raising those resources.
Thank you very much. Avinash.
We need a massive amount of investment today, not in the future. If we do it today and we build resilience and we reduce pollution and emissions, loss and damage will fall in the future and we won't need those revenues.
Brilliant. Yes, thank you. Anna.
Yes, that was very inspirational. It's hard to come afterwards. I think there's going to be a need to build credibility around this Baku to Belém roadmap that is coming out just ahead of COP. And if we can manage to get a group of countries to commit to this ahead of COP, and then that we can showcase that at COP, I think that won't solve everything, but that will send a positive signal that at least some of the actions in this roadmap is going to be taken forward.
Thank you very much. Benoit.
Yeah, nothing much to add, but I think we will keep the theoretical question for later. I mean, it's a rich person question. So at the end of the day, let's get started with concrete, some small steps. And we have an experience in France from a politician named Michel Rocard, who said when it comes to tax, you always need to start small, and you will see after that. And the tax he created like 20 years ago started like 300 million euro, and it's not several billion. So let's get started small and move forward. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm afraid that's it. We're out of time. Please join me. First of all, may I thank you for all your questions, but please also join me in thanking our brilliant panelists for their comments.